Something inside you has already begun to shift, and those around you feel it before you fully understand it yourself. The psyche operates according to laws that transcend conscious awareness, and when genuine transformation begins, it sends ripples through every relationship you have constructed. You may have noticed a strange tension in the air, a subtle withdrawal, a cooling where there was once warmth. This is not your imagination. This is not paranoia. This is the precise moment when your choice to honor yourself collides with the expectations others have built around your compliance. There are no accidents in depth. The fact that you are here now, seeking to understand why your decision to choose yourself has created chaos rather than celebration, reveals that you have already crossed a threshold most people spend their entire lives avoiding. What you feel as confusion is actually the first tremor of consciousness awakening to its own authority. According to my research into the psyche's developmental patterns, there exists a predictable phenomenon that occurs when an individual begins the process of choosing themselves. Through years of studying the unconscious, I observed that the moment a person withdraws energy from the roles they have been playing, the moment they stop performing the version of themselves that others require, a fascinating pattern emerges. The people who benefited most from your self-abandonment become the most vocal critics of your self-discovery. This is not cruelty. This is not even conscious manipulation in most cases. What you are witnessing is the collective unconscious reacting to the disruption of an established energy system. For years, perhaps decades, you functioned as a particular element in the psychological ecosystem of your relationships. You were the one who absorbed tension, the one who sacrificed desires, the one who made yourself smaller so others could feel larger. And now, you have stopped. The panic you observe in others is their psyche recognizing that the structure which allowed them to avoid their own growth has been removed. You are not doing anything to them. You are simply no longer doing everything for them. And this distinction, though subtle, changes everything. What appears as chaos in your relationships is not evidence that you have made a mistake. It is confirmation that you have finally made the right choice. The unconscious speaks in paradox, and nowhere is this more evident than in the phenomenon of growth resistance. When you begin choosing yourself, the external world will mirror back precisely the opposite of what you hope to receive. Where you expected support, you encounter sabotage. Where you anticipated celebration, you face criticism. Where you imagined relief, you discover guilt. But here is where it becomes disturbing. This guilt you feel is not your own. Depth psychology reveals that what we experience as personal shame in moments of boundary setting is actually the internalized voice of every authority that required our self-betrayal to maintain their comfort. The guilt is real, the feeling is genuine, but the source is not you. The transformation that has begun in you threatens something far larger than individual relationships. It threatens the unspoken contract that holds certain family systems, certain friendships, certain professional dynamics in place. That contract states, you will continue to sacrifice your truth so that others need not confront theirs. And the moment you violate that contract, the system reacts with the full force of its survival instinct. This is only the surface. Beneath lies a pattern so consistent, so predictable, that once you understand it, you will never again doubt yourself when the panic begins. The first sign reveals itself in the sudden withdrawal of approval from those who once praised your selflessness. There is a particular kind of person who celebrates your generosity only so long as that generosity flows exclusively toward them. What they called your kindness was never about virtue. It was about utility. You were kind in ways that served their needs, and for this you received validation. But the moment your kindness extends to yourself, the moment you include your own needs in the circle of care, that validation evaporates. The psyche operates through projection, and what these individuals praised in you was not actually you at all. It was the fantasy of unconditional availability. It was the relief of not having to consider reciprocity. When you begin choosing yourself, that fantasy collapses, and with it, their approval. You feel this as rejection. The unconscious interprets it as punishment. But what has actually occurred is that a false relationship has revealed its true foundation. The second pattern emerges as accusations of selfishness appear precisely when you begin practicing basic self-care. This is perhaps the most disorienting aspect of choosing yourself, the complete inversion of language. Actions that would be considered healthy bound, dairies in any other context, are suddenly reframed as cruelty. Taking time for rest becomes abandonment. Expressing a preference becomes control. Declining a request becomes betrayal. What became clear through decades of observation is that the accusation of selfishness is almost always a projection. The individual who calls you selfish for honoring your needs is invariably the same individual who feels entitled to violate those needs without consequence. They are not describing you. They are describing their own unconscious assumption that your resources exist for their consumption. The self, in its wisdom, creates discomfort when we betray our truth. What you are experiencing now is not the pain of doing something wrong. It is the pain of finally doing something right after years of doing what was expected. The accusation stings because part of you still believes that your worth is measured by your usefulness to others, but another part, the part that has begun to awaken, knows differently. The third stage manifests through emotional manipulation disguised as concern for your well-being. This is more sophisticated than outright criticism. Here, the resistance takes the form of worry, of gentle suggestions, of questions posed with apparent care. Are you sure you're okay? You seem different lately. I'm worried about you. This isn't like you. Maybe you should talk to someone. The unconscious, as I came to understand, is far more intelligent than the conscious mind in matters of manipulation. What presents itself as concern is actually an attempt to reinstate the old dynamic by making you doubt the new one. The implication embedded in these worried inquiries is clear. Growth is pathology, change is crisis. Choosing yourself is a symptom of instability. You may recognize this pattern. The people expressing the most concern are often the ones least interested in your actual well-being and most invested in your continued compliance. They do not want you to talk to someone who might validate your transformation. They want you to talk to someone who will convince you to return to the version of yourself they preferred. The fourth characteristic appears when people who never noticed your suffering suddenly claim you have changed. This phenomenon is almost surreal in its precision. For years, you carried pain that was invisible to those around you. You struggled, you sacrificed, you diminished yourself, and no one remarked upon it. But the moment you begin to emerge from that suffering, the moment you start to reclaim your energy, suddenly everyone has opinions about your transformation. You've changed, they say, and the statement carries accusation, not celebration. What they mean is, you have stopped changing yourself to accommodate us, and we do not approve. The change they notice is not your healing, it is their loss of control. You were always changing, shrinking, adapting, disappearing. But that change served them, so it went unremarked. This change serves you, and for that, it cannot be tolerated. In my clinical work, this pattern emerged repeatedly. I recall a woman who came to me after leaving a marriage that had slowly erased her identity. For 15 years, she had molded herself to her husband's expectations, his preferences in food, in friends, in how she dressed, how she spoke, how she spent her time. He never acknowledged this constant shape-shifting. It was simply what he expected. But when she finally stopped, when she began to reclaim her own preferences, her own voice, he was horrified. "You're not the woman I married," he said. And he was right. The woman he married was a performance, and the performance had ended. What she discovered in that moment was that she had never been seen at all. The relationship was built not on love of who she was, but on approval of who she pretended to be. And the moment the pretense stopped, the relationship had nothing left to stand on. The fifth marker reveals itself in the projection of others' unlived lives onto your choices. This is where the resistance becomes most revealing. The archetypal forces at work here expose what people truly fear. Not your failure, but your success. When you begin choosing yourself, you become a mirror reflecting back the choices others did not make. Your courage illuminates their compromise. Your growth highlights their stagnation. What the collective unconscious shows us is that most people are not living their lives. They are living the lives they believe they are supposed to live, following scripts written by family, culture, fear. And when they encounter someone who has begun to deviate from the script, it triggers a profound unconscious disturbance. Your freedom is not just different from their imprisonment. It is evidence that the prison was never locked. So they attack the choice. They dismiss the path. They predict disaster. Not because they know your journey will fail, but because they need it to fail. Your success would require them to confront a devastating question. If you can choose yourself, why haven't they? The panic you witness is not about you at all. It is the terror of the unchosen self confronting its own unlived potential. The sixth sign emerges as certain relationships spontaneously dissolve without conflict or drama. This is perhaps the most peaceful aspect of choosing yourself, though it can also feel the most unsettling. Individuation requires that we release what no longer serves our growth, and sometimes the psyche handles this with surprising efficiency. You do not have a fight. You do not make a declaration. The relationship simply fades. Phone calls become less frequent. Invitations stop arriving. Conversations that once flowed now feel forced. And beneath the surface, both parties understand what is happening. The connection was built on a version of you that no longer exists. And rather than renegotiate the terms, the relationship quietly ends. This is not failure. This is the natural pruning that occurs when consciousness evolves. Not every relationship is meant to survive your transformation, and the ones that dissolve were likely held together by dysfunction rather than genuine connection. The unconscious knows which bonds support your growth and which wreak your diminishment, and it will guide you away from the latter with or without your conscious participation. When a strong reaction rises in you during this dissolution, when you feel grief or guilt or the urge to apologize for growing, pause. Place your attention on your breath for 3 counts. Notice where the emotion lives in your body. You need not analyze or fix it. The pause itself creates space between reaction and response. And in that space, you may recognize that what you grieve is not the relationship itself, but the fantasy of what you hoped it could become. The 7th and final stage appears when you begin attracting entirely different people into your life. This is the moment when the work becomes visibly rewarding. As you withdraw energy from relationships that required your self-betrayal, that energy becomes available for connections that honor your truth. And the psyche, operating according to laws of resonance and recognition, begins drawing toward you individuals who meet you at your new level of consciousness. These new relationships feel different from the beginning. There is less performance, less strategy, less walking on eggshells. You do not have to shrink to be accepted. You do not have to manage someone else's emotions to maintain peace. The connection is based not on what you provide, but on who you are. And this is what relationship was always meant to be. Through years of studying the unconscious, one truth became undeniable. We do not attract what we want, we attract what we are. When you were performing a false self, you attracted people who required that performance. Now that you have begun living from your authentic center, you attract people who recognize and value that authenticity. The shift is not magic. It is simply the psyche aligning external reality with internal truth. But here is where it becomes profound. The new people entering your life are not necessarily easier to be with. What they offer is not comfort, but challenge of a different kind. They will call you forward, not hold you back. They will see your potential, not just your usefulness. They will love you not for what you do, but for who you are becoming. And this kind of love, this kind of witnessing, will demand more from you than compliance ever did. It will demand your continued growth. The transformation that occurs when you choose yourself is not a destination. It is a doorway into a different mode of being. What presents itself initially as loss, the withdrawal of approval, the dissolution of relationships, the accusations and panic, is actually the psyche clearing space for something more authentic to emerge. The old structure had to collapse because it could not contain the self you are becoming. Consider the snake. To grow, the snake must shed its skin. The old covering that once protected it now constricts it, and the only way forward is to leave it behind entirely. The snake does not apologize for this shedding. It does not ask permission from other snakes. It does not pause to consider whether the old skin will be offended by its departure. The snake knows, with a knowing that transcends thought, that growth requires release. You are that snake, and what you are shedding is not just relationships or roles or patterns of behavior. You are shedding an entire identity that was constructed to meet external demands rather than internal truth. This shedding is not betrayal, it is not cruelty, it is not selfishness. It is the most natural process in the psyche's development, and everyone who panics at your transformation is simply revealing that they preferred you constricted. The panic you witness in others when you choose yourself is at its core a fear of abandonment, but not abandonment in the way they claim. What they fear is not that you will leave them. What they fear is that you will stop abandoning yourself, and in doing so, you will expose how thoroughly they have abandoned themselves. Your choice holds up a mirror, and in that mirror, they see not your selfishness, but their own self-betrayal. This is why the resistance is so intense. This is why the accusations feel so personal. You are not just changing your behavior, you are disrupting an entire system of unconscious agreements that allowed everyone to avoid the difficult work of individuation. And systems, when threatened, fight back with everything they have. But the self is stronger than the system. The drive toward wholeness is more powerful than the pull toward compliance. And once that drive has been activated, once you have tasted the freedom of choosing yourself, there is no going back. You can suppress it, you can doubt it, you can let others talk you out of it temporarily, but the knowing remains. The seed has been planted, and what has been awakened in you will not return to sleep. When resistance appears, when others panic, when you feel the weight of their disappointment pressing against your choice, remember this. Their panic is not evidence of your wrongdoing, it is evidence of your progress. The psyche does not reward stagnation with opposition, it rewards growth, and the intensity of the resistance you face is directly proportional to the significance of the transformation you are undergoing. You are not choosing yourself at the expense of others. You are choosing yourself at the expense of the false self you constructed to please others. And that false self, that performance, that mask, that carefully maintained persona is what they mourn. They do not miss you. They miss the version of you that made them comfortable. Let them mourn. Let them panic. Let them project their fears and their unlived lives onto your choices. Their reaction is not your responsibility. Your responsibility is to continue the work that has begun, to honor the stirring in your depths that led you to this threshold, to trust that the psyche knows what it is doing, even when the path forward looks nothing like you imagined. The journey of individuation is not about becoming someone new. It is about becoming who you have always been beneath the layers of conditioning, expectation, and fear. Every relationship that falls away, every accusation that is hurled, every moment of panic you witness in others, these are simply the old structure collapsing to make room for your authentic self to emerge. And here is what they will never tell you, what they cannot tell you, because they do not know. On the other side of this collapse is a kind of peace you have never experienced. Not the peace of compliance, which is really just exhaustion dressed up as harmony, but the peace of alignment, when your inner world and your outer world finally reflect the same truth. When you no longer fracture yourself across incompatible demands, when you can stand in your own presence without apology. This peace is not given to you, it is chosen. And every time you choose yourself in the face of someone else's panic, you are choosing it again. You are saying to the universe, to your psyche, to the depths that guide you, I am willing to let the false collapse so the true can emerge. I am willing to disappoint others to honor myself. I am willing to walk through the fire of their disapproval to reach the ground of my own integrity. You who have begun this work carry something now that cannot be taken back, the knowledge that you are not required to sacrifice yourself for the comfort of others. This knowing will be tested. The old patterns will call you back with seductive familiarity. The voices of those who panic will echo in your mind during moments of doubt. But beneath it all, beneath the noise and the resistance and the fear, there is a quiet certainty growing in you. A certainty that says, I am allowed to exist. I am allowed to have needs. I am allowed to choose myself. And when that certainty becomes louder than the panic around you, when your own voice becomes more authoritative than the chorus of disapproval, that is when you will know the transformation is complete. Not because the external world has changed, but because you have stopped asking it for permission to be whole,